have wealth equivalent to the bottom 50% of Americans. That's 160 million. And the top 1% have wealth equivalent to the bottom 90%. So 60% of Americans are struggling every day to survive. And yet it's the richest nation in the history of the world. And yet it's got military expenditures that are more than the next 10 countries combined. It's got 800 military units all around the world for its empire. And there's no way that poor and working people can be empowered given this kind of arrangement of an empire. So that's where the real effort needs to be. The truth-telling on the one hand, the organizing on the other, and then trying to do it in the spirit of love, though, brother. This is the challenge. You know what I mean? That's the real challenge. How do you talk about Israeli-Palestinian situation without trashing Jewish brothers and sisters? I have no time for any anti-Jewish hatred. I only have time for affirming Palestinian dignity and affirming Jewish security, but Jewish security does not go hand in hand with an Israeli occupation. There will never be Jewish security with an Israeli occupation and domination of Palestinians. How do we engage in this in such a way that we get beyond hatred and revenge, but put love and put justice, and most importantly, put the suffering of the least of these? As you know, I'm a revolutionary Christian, so the 25th chapter of Matthew means much to me. What you do to the least of these, the poor, the oppressed, the subjugated, you do unto me. I take that very seriously in terms of a calling.
But you also have the first woman of color essentially in the White House as Vice President of the United States. And so I'm just asking, has she delivered for the communities you're talking about? I mean, I'm interested in your view because a lot of people point to Kamala Harris and they say, that's a sign of success. Does it feel like a sign of success?
Well, no. I mean, the same thing was true with Obama when we had a black president. You had a black president, you had a black attorney general, you had black Homeland Security, but you got a Black Lives Movement. Why? You had militarized police departments, just like you got militarized apartheid-like conditions on the West Bank and Gaza. That a presence of a black face in a high place symbolically shows a certain breakthrough, but substantially doesn't mean too much if they don't have the courage to critique the status quo that they're a part of. And so Kamala Harris just last year or so, when Biden was asked whether America was a racist society, he said no. And they asked her, is America a racist society? She said no. So she's just following her boss. She's not interested in truth. As I said before, if you can't allow the suffering to speak, you're not speaking truth. We got mass incarceration. My God, 25% of all incarcerated people in the world are in the United States. Most of them black and brown. Deeply, deeply white supremacists in that way, an extension in many ways of the slavery of 244 years in the Western Hemisphere, and Jim Crow and James Crow another 100 years. So you have to be free enough to speak the truth, not in the spirit of self-righteousness, but in a spirit of self-critical, tenacious commitment to the overcoming the plight and predicament of poor and working people around the world. It reminds me of Ida B. Wells Barnett. That's my tradition. It's a great tradition of a black people that says, in the face of terror, we don't terrorize back. We want liberty for everybody, but we will fight. In the face of hatred, we will still love truth and beauty and justice and organize in order to attempt to overcome. In the face of trauma, we'll be wounded healers rather than wounded hurters. That's the great tradition of struggle for black freedom in the United States. And this campaign is just a small wave in that great ocean of that grand tradition, my brother.
In your campaign launch video, Dr. West, you reference your concern about the destruction of American democracy. I'd love to hear more. What is driving that destruction of American democracy from your view?
Well, we've got neo-fascism escalating. What is neo-fascism? It is the rule of big military, big money, with political leaders who convince a relatively helpless citizenry that they should scapegoat the most vulnerable. Indigenous people, black people, Muslims, Arabs, immigrants, Jews, any group that historically has been degraded. And that's precisely what Trump does. And you cannot have a democracy with the rule of big money, with grotesque wealth inequality, with hardly a public sphere, which means everything is commodified, ends up being militarized, ends up being privatized. So there's no public spaces where people can come together and engage in critical reflection. It's simply gangsterized, simply polarized. And the result is what? Tyranny, increasing tyranny. That's what we're seeing in the United States. And that's why it's so important to keep alive the great legacies of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, and others.
You know, next week, the Supreme Court is supposed to rule on affirmative action. And I'm interested, if they strike down affirmative action, do you worry about that? Or is that basically a small measure when it comes to the level of systemic change you're advocating?
Yeah, I mean, my expectation is they certainly will. They'd already diluted it down to very narrow conceptions of diversity. It no longer has anything to do with the kind of call for reparations that are needed in order to begin to deal with the damage done of slavery and Jim Crow and Jane Crow and other forms of domination. So my hunch is they certainly will eliminate affirmative action, and we simply have to continue our struggle and try to come up with ways in which Black people, but not just Black people, but brown people, not just brown people, indigenous people, not just indigenous people, but poor people across the board have ways in which they gain access to resources and dignity. So we simply have to shift in strategies that, my brother, the Supreme Court, deeply conservative, deeply right-wing for the most part.
As you look at the campaign that's coming ahead, I'm really interested in the Green Party, the People's Party, and many people discount that you have any chance at all of winning. But what I've been able to tell them is that your voice is going to be heard. You're going to be out there critiquing. But what is your national strategy politically as you kind of begin this effort, which you launched on June 5th? As you look at the country, how are you going to try and turn someone who's a skeptic of your candidacy into someone who understands what you're doing?
Well, first, though, the political discourse in America has been so narrow that most fellow citizens haven't even been exposed to the kind of vision and analysis that I have. So that it's going to be a real breath of fresh air. I hope that they can see that somebody is concerned about taboo issues that they hardly get a chance to talk about. Look at the Ukrainian war. There's no serious understanding of the impact of the expansion of NATO and the United States violating its promise that NATO would not move 1 inch toward Russia. Americans know that if there were missiles in Canada or Mexico and Russian missiles in Canada and Mexico, U.S. empire would blow them into smithereens. They would never allow it. We saw this in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Well, that's how empires behave. There's no doubt about that. Now, Russia, we know, has its own domination and oppression, but it is a small empire compared to the United States. And so just to have an analysis of ceasefire, stop the war, stop the suffering of our precious Ukrainian brothers and sisters, but understand that NATO historically and is today an arm of U.S. global power. And therefore, it is in no way neutral. It is in no way to be trusted in terms of telling the truth. Most Americans hardly even gain access to that view. They will now in this campaign, because I'll raise that issue over and over again. Same will be true in the Middle East in terms of the Palestinian situation. Same will be true when it comes to what's happening in Latin America vis-a-vis U.S. imperial power. And certainly that will be the case in terms of the mass incarceration, the decrepit schools, indecent housing, unavailable health care for Black, for brown, for white, and others in the richest empire in the history of the world.
Dr. West, from the moment you launched your campaign, the headlines about your campaign launch were Cornel West, spoiler for Biden. I'm fascinated by the commentary that sort of tries to support the lock that two political parties have in the U.S. political system and the immediate enmity of a third party that comes in. I'd love to hear from you and tell those people who have that criticism and see you as a potential spoiler for Joe Biden how you view democracy a little differently.
I mean, it's fascinating to me that those who, on the one hand, supposed to be committed to democracy are so interested in excluding a variety of different voices, especially when those voices are highly critical of unjust status quos. The idea that we could have a political discourse in the United States at this moment with no serious talk about destruction of the planet, let alone destruction of democracy, with no serious talk about the redistribution of wealth downward as opposed to where it is now, going upward, with no serious talk about the issues of class and how it relates to issues of race and gender, let alone how it relates to imperial foreign policy. So it shows, in fact, that our political elites, they're not interested in democracy in any substantive way, a democratic, robust conversation about power, status, justice, and a vision for a better future. Not at all. They've got mechanisms of censorship. They've got mechanisms of exclusion. And to say I'm a spoiler is to say what? That Joseph Biden, that he owns votes? That people can't think for themselves, that people can't be Socratic and reach positions that are outside of the mainstream? How sad.
Let me ask you finally, Dr. West, what would day one of a Cornel West presidency look like?
What I've told my beloved wife, I said, you know, if and when I win, I'm not even going to move into the White House until everyone has a house. That the first day is going to be one in which a paradigm shift has taken place. The first day is one in which we're going to begin the demilitarizing of U.S. foreign policy, the pullback of all the military troops in too many places. Is going to be one in which Wall Street and Pentagon and Silicon Valley elites will begin to tremble because we'll cast a light on their organized greed, not in the spirit of hatred. It's like Jesus in the temple. And I'm no Jesus, but Jesus in the temple ran out the money changers, not because he hated the rich, he hated greed. And this campaign is about a hatred, not of persons, of greed, a hatred of injustice. That will be the spirit of a West administration. And I was just going to say, I pardon Julian Assange and Snowden and Mumia Abu-Jamal and a whole host of political prisoners. That's what I was going to say, my brother.
Well, thank